This is great. So in the room we have design thinking experts, agile, right? Agile methodology experts, and what about lean startup? People know lean startup, so that's perfect. So those three things are what I call lean innovation. A combination of those type of those practices, and where we apply them is wherever there's uncertainty. So my background, I lived through the dot-com boom and bust in Silicon Valley, and back in those days, basically we taught startups how to look like large enterprises for whatever reason. And so the moment you got big enough, you would start forming all of the regular departments inside of any large company. You would have your engineering group and your product management group and marketing and sales and operations and facilities and all of these different departments inside the company. And then as you grow, the communication gets really difficult between these departments. And so the leadership inside of these departments starts creating rules of engagement. You're allowed to talk to each other and use each other's time only if you follow these specific rules. And some of those rules will be like, no, you can't go talk to a customer because I'm the account manager and I own this relationship. And if you want to, you have a new product idea or even new feature idea and you're not in the engineering or product management group, then you maybe have to fill out a form and you have to navigate up and down this department and across all of these places in order to get heard, right? So we're not close to our customers anymore as we grow and we scale this up. And because of all of these processes in place, if we get new information from the marketplace, we can't change our plans, which means no matter how much Scrum and Kanban and all of these agile things to do, in fact, we're not really agile. And suddenly, because of all of these things as well, we're not very fast. So at this point, we've successfully made the startup look like a large enterprise, right? So now you fast forward, boy, a long time now, 10, 15 years. Well, I guess in the 2000s, late 2000s, what we started to do is there was a group of people that were sort of writing about, well, why are we making startups look like large enterprises? The real successful startups already work in a different way. They don't structure themselves that way. You have to wear multiple hats, right? And you have to do whatever is required to make an impact on the company, whatever is going to grow the company or grow the revenues. But if you get a bunch of smart people together and you give them the freedom and you empower them to make changes that will actually have an impact on the company, those people will self-organize in order to achieve that impact. Well, that's exactly what Agile is for, right? And so they become empowered to go out and understand their customers, understand them deeply. Oh, well, that's exactly what all of the design thinking and empathy stuff is about. And instead of just releasing stuff, we're actually going to test it before are we actually building something that somebody wants? Okay, well, that's kind of the lean startup stuff. So really, we sort of work that way naturally if we're allowed to self-organize and we're given an outcome that we want to desire, right? So there was people talking about this and writing about it. And in 2010, I wrote a book called The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development, which was the first book that talked about lean startup and customer development and product market fit and all of these things. And Eric Ries was just blogging about this stuff, and then his book, The Lean Startup, kind of blew off the top of all this stuff. And so suddenly, startups were learning what is the language and what are the processes that we can implement and more formalize inside of the small companies so that we don't become like the big companies. So now my company, my startup, Moves the Needle, teaches large enterprises how to look like startups. So I like to point out that it's based upon uncertainty. And so what we all have to be able to do inside of our jobs and inside of our companies generally is we have to learn how to be in execute mode. We need to balance this execution mode and this learning mode, or exploring. And so if you're inside of a large enterprise, the reason why you've succeeded is because you've discovered a market or multiple markets, and you've created this blueprint, this roadmap that tells you how to market, sell, build products for this known market. And so there's actually very little uncertainty. There's still uncertainty, and we have to think about that, but there's very little uncertainty. And so we build this execution engine, we build these layers of management and all of these other things in order to execute on the way that blueprint was written. And so it's very hierarchical, and there's not a lot of creativity, but that's how we make these billions of dollars in these big companies. And then if you think about on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the startup. The startup, maybe you're forced to write a business plan. Nowadays it's a deck with 9 or 10 slides, and it details all of the things that you think are true about your startup opportunity, but none of it is known. We actually don't know the market that well. We're not positive about the solution. We don't know how to market and sell to it. So we have to work differently. You can't just execute in the unknown. You have to learn first. You have to search. You have to start creating that blueprint. But so startups, if you're successful at all, you start moving towards the execution mode because you start creating this blueprint. And the trick becomes that at some point you actually have to start putting those practices in place. You have to start repeating things because you're repeating what's successful in that roadmap. And so you're learning how to execute. And it's really the hard side of the equation. It's very, the startups that are succeeding raise hundreds of millions of dollars because it's very expensive to build an execution engine from scratch. The large enterprise faces the other dilemma. So there's a little bit of uncertainty, and they're just trying to execute their way through that small amount of uncertainty. How am I going to hit my numbers this year? And so they put tremendous pressure on their employees, like trying to squeeze the blood out of the turnip, is a saying we have. And it's increased productivity, increased efficiency. How do we create just a little bit of capacity that we can grow into in order to hit our numbers? Because we don't know how to search anymore. We don't know how to do a learning mode in order to close that gap of uncertainty. And of course, our products reach the top of the S-curve, and our revenues are going to start to decline, and so there's more uncertainty when you project 2 years out, and even more uncertainty when you project 3 or 4 or 5 years out, to the point when you're trying to predict where your growth or where your revenue is going to come 5 or 6 years from now. It's massive amounts of uncertainty, and you should be acting more like a startup then, but the big companies don't know how to do that. And so that's one of the things that we try to teach them now is through this combination of design thinking and lean startup and agile, how do you actually learn wherever there's that uncertainty? And so it's this balance that you have to strike in all of these organizations, from the startup trying to scale and from the large enterprise that's trying to reinvent where their growth is going to come from in a few years. So I think that the other interesting thing, and it's why I really enjoy talking at Product Tanks and the Mind the Product conference, is you people in the room are the ones that actually learn how to combine those things in such a way that the dogma and the worry about the language and the buzzwords mean less than actually how are we forming ourselves in order to make an impact on the company. So in other words, lean startup circles used to be all over the world like product tanks are. And there's sort of not the need for it anymore because you have product managers and designers and even engineers that are adopting a lot of these principles into their daily work. So let me ask you, do you feel like those three things are pretty much ingrained into your daily work or not so much? So people are pretty confident that you have that working? Yes, not a whole lot, okay. And is the challenge, do you think, a lack of education, or do you think it's leadership? So what we run across in most organizations is that people actually want to work this way because it's a fun way to work. If you're an engineer, would you rather write to a specification, or would you actually rather go and experience the problem or see the problem firsthand and engineer a solution to that problem? I mean, that's why we call them engineers, right? You actually don't build a bridge just by looking at the specification sheet. So this concept of being able to get the engineers back out to see the problem and they get to figure out the solution is way more powerful than the way the specifications are created through, I mean, I used to be the old school waterfall product manager and just get in debates with the engineers about what we're going to put in the next release. And of course, in those days, release is the product is done based upon the calendar. Like, I mean, how dumb is that? So the customer actually tells you when the product's done. So bring the product out to them like really early and see if they buy it, right? See if they'll take it. I remember one instance, the last startup I was at, and we had this big new release. We actually were building a network appliance that did we were a packet sniffer company, so we were taking all of this network traffic and we would analyze it looking for anomalies, problems on the network. And this was the first time we did hardware, and we did the whole release date thing, and we got there and we just like pushed the thing out the door, and God, customers hated it. And then all we did is we just said, oh no, but this is just the, this is just the early release. This is an alpha release, not even a beta. And they're like, oh, okay. And they gave us feedback on all the problems it was. And 6 months later when we shipped it, it was actually rock solid. And it's funny because back in those days, this is so long ago, nobody was saying lean startup or any of this stuff. It was what you had to do to be successful is you got stuff out early and get the feedback and then you iterate. And so that's all we're really talking about. But the other part of it that I find interesting in the way it's put into practice is what we used to call customer development. I don't even talk about customer development anymore because design people have been doing the empathy work for way longer than coining the term customer development. But there's a lot of misunderstanding about how to do that as well, right? So understanding your customers is not as you want and then doing what they say. So if you think about the big company, some of the more traditional ways of gathering feature requests work okay for incremental improvements. Well, because the customer actually understands the solution and they understand the market, and you as the company understand the market. And so there's a conversation that's going there where you can believe what the customer says. But if you try those same tactics over in the startup side of things where there's lots of uncertainty, you can't just ask your customers what they want. They have no idea. But that won't stop them from telling you what they think you should build. Right? You'll still get a laundry list of feature requirements. The only difference is that they'll never use those features. You're actually asking them to help you at that point. Oh, what do you think of my idea? What do you think of my idea? I'm asking that person to help me. And they're friendly people, and they're just going to go, oh, yeah, that's cool. You should really build this, and did you think of this, and why not this and that? And you're like, oh, God, this is great information. Go build it, you bring it back to them. You go, oh, I don't care about this. Right? So the way you're interacting with the customers when you're facing lots of uncertainty is different. Don't ask them about their future. Would you do this? Would you pay X? It's all bullshit. They have no idea. Customers are horrible at predicting their own future. So you have to, what the job really is, you can get them to talk about their past. Have they behaved in a particular way? So that's a way to get truth from them. If you dive deeply into their problems and you're actually trying to get, really develop empathy, and you understand their aspirations and you understand why they say what they say, you actually can get an emotional reaction from them. They're not lying when they actually have an emotional response. So it's not like that you want to make them cry, but I mean, you do want to get them to a point where there's some emotion going on, and then you're really learning deep stuff about them. But even in those situations, it's not about their suggestions, it's understanding what the problem is. And then it's your guys' responsibility to come up with the idea. So when you're applying what I call the 3 E's of lean innovation, empathy, experiments, and evidence, what you're doing is you're understanding the customer, you go out, you get the empathy. It's up to you to come up with the idea, but then we go into this mode of testing whether the idea is valid. And so the idea there, the second E, this experiment, is not that you build the MVP. You don't go do empathy and then build the MVP. There's all of these, MVP is just an experiment with a super high degree of fidelity. So there's all these smaller experiments that you can run first, before that is testing about whether you're going down the right path. Is there a business model even there? Will they use it if I build it? Right? If you just do the design thinking part of it and you do all this rapid prototyping, you can convince somebody it's a beautiful product. But again, it doesn't mean they'll buy it. It doesn't mean that there's a business model there. So the lean startup component of this is, how do I run some experiments that validate or invalidate the riskiest assumptions about this solution? And so most organizations now do a lot of split testing, right? You're running A/B tests. What color, should the button be? That stuff is very execution-minded type of lean startup, right? I mean, so those are great experiments. You got to run some of those experiments. But when you're on the higher degree of uncertainty side, the experiments need to be way bigger. And by experiments, I don't mean just throwing shit against the wall. It's a disciplined approach of creating a hypothesis. If we do X as a business, if we do X, Y percentage of customers will behave in way Z. So we get companies that go out and build very rudimentary prototypes. There's a hospital in Portland, Oregon, where they wanted to develop a solution to get the doctors and nurses to wash their hands more, which seems pretty crazy in this day and age. But there was just one sink in the back of this room, and there was a line there, and people just, they weren't doing it. So the idea that they came up with was this box, this atomizer that you could put your hands in the box like this, and if you held it there for 30 seconds, it would clean the hands, it would sanitize the hands. And so they built a prototype. Their riskiest assumption was there's no way a surgeon is going to stand there for 30 seconds, their hands in the box in front of all their colleagues. They won't do it. So they built the prototype, and they went to the hospital, and they ran the experiments, and 19 out of 20 stood there for 30 seconds. It was actually really convenient for them. So they loved it. So that doesn't mean go build a product either, but it's an indication that the people would behave in a way that they would be able to get the value from the product. So now you go to the next step, and maybe you run an experiment with more people, or maybe you start building the product and validate the technology works, that sort of thing. So as you step along, as you progress along, you're increasing the fidelity of the experiments until you get to the point where actually building the product, the minimum viable product, the idea of what are the minimum features that actually make that product viable, then you create that part of it. And that's just a bigger experiment. So the third E in all of this is often the toughest part for both startups and enterprises, and that's actually being willing to use the evidence in order to make your decisions. So inside the large enterprise, the ideas probably came from a senior leader, and so they already know, right? Because inside the large enterprise, smart people really can predict the future if they think harder, right? No. But their careers are sort of based upon them being successful in execution mode, and so that's how they their whole ethos is built around that, and they really think they do have all of the answers. But if the evidence suggests otherwise, you actually can convince, they'll actually buy into it usually. They're smart people. Inside of the startup, what you have is the visionary, right? So famous visionaries like Steve Jobs, right? He's pretty much the guy that's considered the visionary. So I love my iPhone. But what's interesting to me about the iPhone is that it's not really any of the technology that disrupted the phones. There were smartphones before the iPhone. What changed the world was when the iPhone opened up the App Store to third-party developers. And so a lot of people don't know, the first year that the iPhone was out, the App Store was not open to third-party developers. It had to go through Apple developers. And that was Steve Jobs. That was his decision. Everybody else was like, no, you gotta open it up to third-party developers. He's all like, nope. So he'd had a partner with a company called Singular One and Motorola, and he felt like he'd gotten sort of screwed by that before, so he wasn't gonna do it again. So, but wait a second, he's a visionary. Of course he knew to open it, right? He's a visionary, he can see the future. Nope. the reason why he's sort of a visionary is because a year later, developers were like breaking into the App Store in order to put apps on there. He actually relented. It was that he would change and follow the market, not just stick to his own beliefs. That actually makes a true entrepreneur. So you want to stick with it, you want to persevere. This is sort of the balance of being an entrepreneur. You want to stick to your idea, because really the tough idea is, you have to break through a really thick wall. But at some point, when your forehead's bleeding and you've got a concussion, you got to maybe think of where's the market actually telling me to go. And so it's being able to listen to the market as well and to change course to where the market's pulling you. And if you've got developers that are like breaking in to put apps on there, that's a pretty good market indication that there's something going on over there. But anyway, once it's opened up to third-party developers, that's what turned the phone into a platform. And sort of the world has changed ever since. So it's really hard on the entrepreneur side to, it's hard to admit your baby's ugly. And it's sort of a sad truth, right? And so sometimes you have to be able to do that because that's the only way that you're going to make a significant enough change to actually go where the market's pulling you to go. So I don't know if people inside the company, I sort of raised this issue about the leadership before and how that often puts a stop on working this way. I think if you're in a startup, that's probably not true because hopefully you're already sort of nimble and agile and all those things. If you're one of the people inside the large enterprise, you might not even, you haven't maybe even been exposed to being able to work this way on a regular basis. But once you have, it's like there's no going back. I mean, every human, not just startup people, every human actually wants to be able to exercise their creativity and be inspired and be able to be empowered to understand customers and then create value for them. I mean, that's why we do what we do. We love that. And so when we train these companies how to do that, the people themselves, that's the easiest part. And again, there's all these methodologies, but the methodologies aren't as important as giving people the time and the space and the empowerment to go and solve people's problems. We're hardwired to do that. But the leaders are often compensated based upon hitting numbers, so they're always, and they also, themselves, they don't know how to manage in an environment like that. And it's kind of funny because what we often see is this leadership level that goes like, no, I don't know how to hold those teams accountable. They get to just go off and do whatever they want. We're actually in town doing a leadership summit for a global medical device company. And there's one woman there that goes like, oh yeah, all of those teams they're working that way, they're just out having fun. I mean, that was like, they produced nothing, but they all had a really good time. And she was like so cynical, it was crazy. And of course, they actually had made a tremendous amount of impact, so I don't know what her problem was. But anyway, people that have grown up on this execution mode, it's really difficult for them to even know how to manage teams. And so that's a lot of the work that we do, is teaching them how to be mentors. So you teach the leadership how to be mentors and investors. So they have to learn new ways of holding teams accountable. And so it's asking a lot of questions rather than giving answers. And it's, even if you have an opinion, everybody has an opinion, that's fine, but you frame it in terms of an assumption instead of like, I know because I'm a leader. And you teach them how to help startups figure out what is the most important metric that they should be tracking. So it's oftentimes entrepreneurs get lost in their, often their vanity metrics and the number of downloads and the number of logins and all of these things that actually don't drive impact for the business. And so a good investor actually already knows how to do that. And we can teach these leaders how to behave in that way as well. So that's the trick at one level to get these teams functioning this way. But I want to talk about one other aspect of the difference between the way startups at least are initially and then what they end up being in terms of the large enterprise. Because this is actually kind of radical, and if there are startup founders here, it's something that you really have to pay attention to. So the structure that I was talking about at the beginning, those departments that go into silos, basically an extension of the assembly line. So that structure came out of extending the assembly line into the executive, the white-collar part of the business. So I don't have to tell you guys anymore that we're not in the industrial age anymore. is the actual structure of the company that forces people to not be close to their customers, to not be agile, and to move slow. So we can all get the people working in a different way, but if you keep the structure the same, the moment you step away, everybody goes back into their silos and the behavior returns. The culture comes out of the structure. So we get these people to work in these different ways. The big question mark becomes, how do we structure the company now that keeps people working that way? And so if you're familiar with the Spotify model, their engineering group that's organized around guilds and tribes and chapters, this is an example of how you can structure a company in a new way. So basically, you've got these guilds that are based upon domain expertise. In their case, they only did it with the engineering group. So it's back-end developers or database people, front-end developers. And this is where it's not a reporting mechanism, but rather it's a way for you to increase the abilities. It's like the old pre-industrial age guilds. You can have an apprentice and a master inside this skill level. And then for getting the work done, you cut tribes across these guilds based upon the talent that you need, the cross-functional team, in order to drive a particular part of a product, or I'll share a different method with you in a bit, but you assign that team a metric, a part of the product and a metric, and then that team self-organizes around moving that number, around moving those metrics. And what happens, of course, is you lose all these layers of middle management because you, as a team like that, you don't really need a manager. And the cool thing about that is if you do that for the company-wide, is that the metrics that you're managing the team on have a direct line to what your company objectives are. So if you're responsible for increasing engagement for a product, and you know that engagement is worth a certain amount of money because people continue to pay, then the more customers you get into that level of engagement, you know how much money you're making. The way we measure typically now, based upon KPIs, is we're measuring people's repeatable behavior. Like, how many times did you do this? How many lines of code did you write? How many features did you produce? How many bugs did you fix? So those are all the KPIs, and we hope that behavior results in a more solid product. And if there's a more solid product, the engagement increases. And if the engagement increases, we improve the company numbers. But there's not a direct line. There's a lot of hope in between. So there's a bank in Europe, in Amsterdam, ING, that's modeling their whole company based upon this, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. Old bank taking, here's the retail bank or the wholesale banking division inside of a country, guilds, tribes, chapters, and they convert this whole, they call it converting it into agile. Their version of lean innovation is called PACE, and they see a direct correlation between the companies that are structured that way, the parts of the organization that are already structured that way perform in this lean innovation way better than other ones, not surprisingly, because the culture comes out of the structure. So one other thing I want to introduce to you, and then I'll stop and take questions if you'd like. Preguntas? There's somebody telling me that it's already time. So in my book, The Lean Entrepreneur, I have this framework that I call value stream discovery. And so basically it's 7 steps that a customer goes through from becoming aware of a product to becoming passionate. So first they have to learn from whatever marketing campaign, they become aware of the existence of the product. Then based upon the messaging, the person becomes intrigued. I feel like you guys are talking to me, and I am your customer, and I'm interested in that product. Then I need to become trusting. And the trusting aspect is I believe that you're the right company to deliver on the promise. Then hopefully I become convinced, and I sign up or I buy. Then I go through this state I call hopeful, which is basically I hope I made the right decision. And then I become satisfied, which is equivalent to what you maybe call an engaged user or an active user. So I'm continuing to use the product in a particular way that I would only do that because I'm actually receiving the value that was promised to me. And then the last step is passionate. So I want to highlight a couple of those. But basically one way to structure the company might be that you're forming tribes in order to move customers between those states. So growth isn't binary. People think about product market fit and they think, oh, once we found it, we're good to go. But growth is what happens in between bottlenecks. So this is the normal state of a company. It's flat, or it's maybe moderate growth, or it's moderate down. And so the problem is that there's something stopping the growth. And you have to discover, and I sort of teach how to use the value stream in order to discover where's that bottleneck. And if I then remove the bottleneck, I should see growth again until I hit the next flat. But so a couple of parts of that value stream that I think are important. The first one that you start with is this satisfied. So you're an active user or an engaged user. So you have to be able to get them to use the product in a particular way before you ramp up all your marketing, right? Or else you're just wasting all your marketing spend because you get everybody into your funnel, and by the time they get to the product and they don't like the product, you've just wasted all of those people. So you have to prove that you actually can create value in the product. So that's sort of the satisfied part. The other part that I think to get them there, you have to work on the intrigued. And intrigued is basically, it's like the value proposition. So there's two parts of an intrigued message that you want to create. One is, what is the utility promise I'm making? So I am solving this problem with this product. You have to fulfill that promise. If you don't fulfill that promise, you don't have a business. And the second part of it is, what is the aspiration that the customer has? So why would they join a journey with you? Why would they go on this journey with you to experience this product, to solve this problem? And that journey, that aspiration can be related to the impact it has on somebody's life. It could be a bunch of other things that I'll talk about in a minute, but I'll give you an example. So I was working with this entrepreneur in Toronto, and he built a music app. And that if my daughter uses this iPad music app, she would practice music more. So that's the promise. The app is cool, it's fun, she'll practice this, and she'll be at the same time practicing her music lessons. So that's the utility promise. Has to deliver. If my daughter doesn't use the app because she doesn't like it, we're not customers, right? So he has to fulfill that utility function. I asked, why are you building this app? And he said, to save parents money. And I was like, that doesn't really make sense to me. I pay for music lessons, you want me to pay for your app, how are you saving me? No. Why are you building the app? What has driven you to build the app? He said, oh, well, it's because I'm a musician. I go, okay, yeah, that's interesting. What about being a musician? And he said, I want kids to grow up to love music. I go, yeah, me too. That's why I'm paying for the music lessons. So he can't promise that my daughter will grow up to love music. That's the journey that we can go on together. So if you have both the functional part and the journey part, that's what results in the passionate customer. And so we have to think outside of just the product in order to get to passionate users. It's something, listen, I love my iPhone. I was passionate about my iPhone when it first came out. I don't think I'm passionate about it anymore. So we're all waiting for Apple's next thing, right? But more, so sometimes the user experience is so great, people are passionate. But more often than not, it's something else. There's a soap company in the US called Method. And basically, they took household cleaning products and put them in containers so that housewives wanted to put the bottle on top of the sink instead of under the counter. Completely flip the market around. I mean, so that's kind of crazy. That's the packaging, right? Or you guys maybe know HubSpot, the content marketing platform. Nobody's passionate about a software platform that measures marketing crap. I mean, nobody's passionate about that. But they do great content marketing. When they were a startup, they were amazing content marketing, and they gave it away for free. Ways to measure your website performance, books on how to become a better entrepreneur, just tons of content marketing that they gave away. People would go crazy sharing their content even if they were not customers. And so the idea is that eventually, hopefully, they become enough to afford their ridiculous prices, and then you become a customer. But the idea there is that they're helping people become better entrepreneurs. So that's sort of a journey that they're going on as well. all of the startups, Tom's Shoes gives a pair of shoes to homeless people for every pair of shoes that they sell. Company in San Diego that helps cure glaucoma and developing worlds for buying a pair of their sunglasses. So, sort of the social impact part of it is about generating, it's not cynically, they're just trying to create profits. They're doing it because that's who they are. But that's also getting people to join that journey, and that's how people get to passionate. So if you fulfill that utility function and you feel like you're doing good in the world, what is the behavior of a passionate customer? The passionate customer puts people into the top of your marketing funnel without you spending any money on marketing, right? It closes the loop. And so those customers those companies that are able to achieve that see that organic growth. And there's buzz about the company and buzz about the product. Marketing's not about creating buzz. Marketing is about amplifying the buzz that's already been created by your company, by your product, and brought by this passionate component. So it's super key to think about how are you going to get people to join this journey so you can get them to passionate beyond the user experience of the product. So that's the value stream. The three most important parts to optimize first. The intrigued messaging, getting that right. Utility function plus that aspiration, that journey. Iterating on the product until you're delivering on the promise that you made, that utility function. And then whatever that journey is that gets your customer to passionate. And those three things are what drive the growth of the company, and everything else is sort of just optimizing. Now you can blow up your marketing and you should see a bunch of growth, and you're working on the trusting and the convince part to get people through the sales cycle. And I can mention hopeful real quickly. Hopeful is like this funky state where you're like, okay, I haven't tried to receive the value, but I've essentially already paid for it. So you have to get them to that state as quickly as possible. So if you're a good mobile app developer, you point out three things to try out first, to try to get them to create that or to try to receive that value as quickly as possible. You buy a kid a toy for the holidays, and they go home and they open it up and they're all like excited to play with it, and then there's no batteries. And you're like, crap. And you run to the store and get batteries, and you come back and the kid's playing with the box instead of the toy. Yes. So we buy toys that actually have batteries included, stamped on the box, right? Why are batteries included? So the kid to get the value out of it right then and there. So, I've just talked a lot. But that's what I have for you. Thank you very much.